My name is Atif, and for several years I worked as the driver of Police Officer Shabir, a man who commanded both respect and admiration in the force. Despite being in his 50s, he was known for his energy, his sharp appearance, and his dedication to duty. To me, he was not just a boss, but almost like a mentor, someone I quietly looked up to. Most days, my job was simple: drive him to the station, accompany him to meetings or raids, and by evening, I was free to return home. My own life was much simpler than his. I lived alone in a modest house on the edge of the city, while my family remained in the village. That evening, however, my routine changed. Officer Shabir's wife suddenly fell ill, and I was instructed to drive them to the hospital. The night was heavy with storm clouds, and by the time we returned, rain had begun to fall, first in a drizzle, then in sheets that turned the roads into mirrors of water. By then, it was late, and Shabir, aware that I lived far away, insisted I take his car home for the night. His kindness often surprised me, and I did not refuse. The road I took was long and lonely, cutting through fields and clusters of trees. On one side, thorny bushes clung to the edges, and on the other, shadows of tall trees bent under the weight of the storm. The faint streetlights flickered against the downpour, and my headlights were the only constant beam of clarity in the darkness. I was exhausted from the day, eager to reach my bed and press the accelerator harder, hoping to cross the deserted stretch quickly. But just as I settled into the rhythm of the storm, something caught my eye: a figure ahead, standing right in the middle of the road. My heart leapt into my throat. At first glance, it looked like a young woman draped in a white sheet, her arms raised, signaling me to stop. My mind froze between fear and disbelief. Why would a girl be out here alone in such weather, with no houses or villages nearby? For a terrifying moment, I wondered if it was something unnatural, a spirit born of the night. I whispered a prayer under my breath and instinctively tried to speed past, but before I could, she moved directly into my path. My hands slammed the brakes and the car screeched to a halt. She was real, flesh and blood, knocking desperately at my window, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the dark line of trees behind her as though death itself lurked there. That was the moment everything in my life began to change. The girl's knuckles beat against the glass as if her very life depended on it. Her lips moved quickly, but the sound of rain hammering on the car roof drowned her words. I hesitated for a second, torn between instinct and compassion, but then I saw her eyes. They weren't empty or cold like something supernatural. They were filled with terror, darting again and again toward the trees, as if unseen hunters were closing in. Against every warning, my mind whispered, I unlocked the door. She flung it open and climbed into the back seat, her drenched clothes clinging to her slight frame. She was trembling so badly that for a moment I thought she might collapse. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, and then she whispered with a voice that cracked, Please, save me. They're going to kill me. I turned in my seat, trying to study her through the dim light. Who is going to kill you? Who are you running from? My questions seemed to rattle her even more. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking like a frightened child. In the glove compartment, I usually kept a spare bottle of water. I reached for it, twisted the cap, and handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she took it, but she drank as if she had been wandering in a desert. When she finally paused, her breath steadied enough for words. My name is Amina, she began, her voice low and uncertain. I don't have a mother. She died when I was very young. My father, he is a gambler, a drunk. For years, he sold whatever he could, my mother's jewelry, the furniture, even the clothes on our backs, to feed his habits. Finally, when nothing was left, he abandoned me at my uncle's house. She paused, her eyes fixed on the floor mat. My uncle raised me as best as he could. He was poor, but at least I had food, and I was taught to read the Quran. Later, I began teaching children to earn a little, and kind neighbors would sometimes give me small gifts or money. For a moment, she seemed calmer, but then her voice cracked again. 2 weeks ago, my father came back. He dragged me away from my uncle's house and announced he would marry me off. I didn't understand until I overheard him on the phone. He had lost me in a bet. He gambled his own daughter, and the man he lost me to is cruel, dangerous, the kind who destroys everything he touches. I couldn't stay. I ran away in the night, hoping to disappear before they found me. But they did. They're following me, even now. Her words settled heavy inside me. each one more painful than the last. I glanced at her through the mirror, seeing not just a drenched, frightened girl, but someone who had been betrayed by her own blood. She sat curled in the back seat, clutching the empty water bottle, her eyes brimming with fear. In that stormy night, with the road stretching into darkness ahead, I realized she had nowhere to go, and somehow fate had placed her in my path. Her confession hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. For a few moments, I said nothing, my hands gripping the steering wheel, unsure of what to do. She sat hunched in the back seat, clutching her shawl tightly around her as if it were the only shield she had left. My instinct told me to be cautious. What if her story wasn't true? Yet the desperation in her eyes, the way her voice cracked with every sentence, didn't feel like a lie. I cleared my throat. Do you have anyone you trust? A friend? A relative? Someone I can take you to? She shook her head, staring out at the rain-smeared window. No one. I have nothing left. Wherever destiny pushes me, I will go. But right now, if you leave me here, I won't live to see morning. Her words struck me like a blade. I glanced at the empty road ahead, then back at her pale face. Leaving her on the roadside in such a storm was unthinkable. Yet taking her into my world was risky, even dangerous. My life was ordinary, stable, and small. I wasn't used to decisions like this. After a long pause, I finally said, "Listen. My house is not far. It's small, nothing fancy, but it's safe. You can stay there for tonight. In the morning, you can decide where to go, and I'll even give you some money to help." Her reaction was immediate. She stiffened, her eyes widening with suspicion. "Please, don't misunderstand me. I am not that kind of girl. I'd rather die in the rain than be taken advantage of." Her words stung, though I understood her fear. "You don't know me," I replied, forcing calm into my voice. "But I give you my word, I'm not after anything dishonorable. I'm a driver for a police officer. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't be offering you shelter. But if you step out into the night now, you're walking straight into the hands of the men hunting you. Decide carefully." For a moment, she just stared at me, her wet lashes trembling. Then slowly she nodded. "Fine. But only for one night. Tomorrow, I will leave." I drove the rest of the way in silence, the wipers slicing across the windshield, the rain finally beginning to soften. When we reached my small house, I guided her to the room inside while I prepared a bed for myself in the courtyard. I told her to lock the door from the inside and rest. That night, lying awake on the charpoy with the storm still echoing faintly, I wondered what strange twist of fate had placed her in my path. I didn't know then how deeply this single decision would change the course of my life. When I woke the next morning, sunlight had replaced the storm, and for a moment I wondered if the entire night had been nothing but a strange dream. I half expected the house to be empty, the girl gone. And indeed, when I knocked on the door of the room I had given her, there was no answer. The lock hung loose, the bed was untouched. She had slipped away quietly, just as she had promised. A small part of me felt relief, but another part was uneasy. Where could she have gone in such a state, with no money and nowhere to belong? I tried to shake off the thought and went to work. The day passed in its usual rhythm, driving Officer Shabir, waiting by the car while he attended meetings, then dropping him home in the evening. But when I returned to my own house, a shock awaited me. The gate creaked open, and instantly I sensed something unusual. The floor of the courtyard, normally dusty, gleamed as if freshly washed. The laundry that had hung untouched for days was neatly folded. Inside, the house smelled of soap and warm food. I froze, listening. From the kitchen came the sound of utensils clattering. My first thought was that a thief had broken in, though what kind of thief cleans and cooks? Cautiously, I stepped toward the kitchen, my heartbeat quickening. When I reached the doorway, I stopped short. There she was, the same girl from last night, standing at the stove, her sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of food as though she had always belonged there. "You?" I exclaimed. "How did you get in?" The doors were locked. She startled, nearly dropping the spoon, then looked away guiltily. "I climbed the wall." I stared at her in disbelief. climbed the wall. You? She was slim, delicate, hardly the kind one imagined vaulting over gates. She smiled faintly, almost shyly. I had to climb walls many times before. Escaping from my father's house, running across rooftops in the village. I suppose I became good at it. Her answer left me speechless. There was something both tragic and admirable in her resourcefulness. I glanced at the meal she was preparing. The aroma filled the room, rich and comforting. "Why come back?" I asked finally. Her voice softened. On the road, two men started watching me. Their eyes. I knew they were after me. I panicked and returned. I thought at least here I might be safe. I didn't know whether to scold her recklessness or admire her courage. But as I sat later with the food she had cooked, tasting flavors that reminded me of home, I realized a subtle shift had begun. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was slowly weaving herself into the corners of my life. That evening, after finishing the meal she had prepared, I carried my charpoy into the courtyard and lay under the open sky. The storm of the previous night had left the air cool and fragrant, yet I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, moving quietly around the kitchen, her face bent over the firelight, her voice trembling when she spoke of fear. She was beautiful, but not in the way that dazzled at first sight. Her beauty was softer, layered with dignity, and it drew me in despite my efforts to keep distance. I reminded myself she was just a guest, a stranger who needed help. Still, the house no longer felt empty. She moved about with such quiet grace that even silence seemed warmer. Yet, being a man, I was not immune to temptation. I worried about my thoughts, about the dangerous whisper of desire that might one day overpower reason. Before lying down that night, I knocked on her door and told her firmly, "Lock this from the inside. Don't open it until morning. I don't want the devil putting any ideas into either of our minds." She looked at me for a long second, then nodded silently. I heard the lock slide into place, and only then did I settle on my bed outside. The next dawn, before even the first call to prayer echoed across the neighborhood, I woke to the sound of recitation. It was soft at first, a melody flowing through the walls of her room. Then it grew clearer, words rolling off her tongue with such sweetness that I sat upright, entranced. It was her voice, reading with a tenderness that touched my heart more deeply than I had ever felt. I leaned against the wall and listened, unable to move, as though the house itself had turned into a sanctuary. By the time she emerged, wrapped modestly in her shawl, I had already made up my mind. Over breakfast, I spoke carefully. "Amina, I need to tell you something. You can't live like this forever, hiding, running, fearing the next day. And I can't pretend you're just passing through my life. You are alone and I am alone. If we marry, you'll have protection, dignity, and a home." Her spoon clattered against the plate. Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't know what you're asking. To take in a girl like me with that nothing, it would be a burden. It would be an honor," I interrupted softly. She wept openly then, but after a long pause she whispered, "If this is truly what you want, then I will agree." That evening, I called my mother to tell her. By nightfall, Amina and I were bound in marriage. And though it felt sudden, my heart told me it was the beginning of something I could no longer resist. Married life with Amina began simply, but with an odd sense of completeness. She carried herself with modesty, waking before dawn for prayers, keeping the house spotless, and treating me with a gentleness I had never known. Despite my modest salary, she never complained. In fact, she managed our home so well that it puzzled me. My earnings barely covered basic expenses, yet on our dining mat, she would always place meals that looked too generous for our budget. At first, I dismissed it, thinking perhaps she was simply skilled at stretching what little we had. One evening, however, I returned from work to find something that shook me. In the middle of the courtyard lay a large bag filled with flour, ghee, and even meat. We hadn't spoken to anyone about our needs, and I certainly hadn't bought it. "Where did this come from?" I asked, bewildered. Amina looked at me calmly, her voice steady. "Someone leaves it at the door." I open it, and it is there. Perhaps God sends a kind soul to help us. Her explanation sounded too simple, almost impossible. Yet her eyes shone with conviction, and I wanted to believe. Still, a seed of doubt planted itself in my heart. Could provisions really appear so conveniently? Days turned into weeks, and similar incidents repeated. Sometimes money appeared folded inside the pages of the Quran. Other times, small bundles of notes were tucked under the prayer mat she used. Each time I asked, Amina would only smile faintly and say, "When you trust God, He finds a way." I should have been skeptical, but the evidence was undeniable. I had seen with my own eyes bundles of cash she pulled from unlikely places, and each time she insisted it was the unseen hand of God answering her supplications. Slowly, I stopped questioning and began to accept the mystery as truth. With these unexpected resources, life became easier. We no longer struggled with rent or food. Eventually, a sum large enough appeared that we were able to purchase the small house we lived in, transforming it into a permanent home. It felt like a miracle, and I attributed it all to Amina's piety. Her reputation for devotion grew in my eyes. She spent long hours in prayer, whispering words of remembrance, her lips moving silently even as she cooked or cleaned. Watching her, I felt both comforted and unworthy, as if I had been blessed beyond measure. But beneath my awe was also a quiet unease. The gifts seemed too perfect, too convenient. Still, love silenced my doubts. I told myself it was God's grace shining through her. Little did I know these miracles were part of a truth that would one day shatter my entire world. Life with Amina seemed charmed, yet beyond the walls of our small home, a storm brewed. Officer Shabir, my superior, was deeply involved in dismantling a narcotics smuggling network that had rooted itself across the country. He was fearless, always putting his men and his mission first, and I admired him for that. His enemies, however, were many, and danger clung to every assignment we undertook. One evening, after dropping him at the station, he called me aside with unusual gravity in his eyes. "Atif," he said, "we have enough evidence now. In the coming days, we'll strike, but I suspect someone is feeding our movements to the enemy. Be careful whom you trust." His warning unsettled me, though I brushed it off at the time. When I reached home that night, I recounted his words to Amina, partly out of habit. She listened intently, her gaze fixed on me, and then asked, "What exactly did he mean? Where will this raid take place? When?" Her question struck me as odd. She was usually reserved, but suddenly she wanted details. I assumed it was concern for my safety and answered vaguely, promising her I would be cautious. She insisted on reciting prayers over me, blowing softly onto my forehead as if to shield me from harm. I felt comforted, yet a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that her curiosity was unusual. Days later, the raid came. Our team moved at dawn, confident in secrecy. But before Shabir could lead the charge, gunfire erupted from the shadows. The smugglers were waiting for us, heavily armed and perfectly prepared. Chaos exploded. I saw Shabir fall, clutching his arm where a bullet tore through. We fought desperately, but the enemy slipped away, leaving us wounded and humiliated. I rushed Shabir to the hospital, blood soaking my clothes, refusing to leave his side until dawn. When he finally opened his eyes, relief washed over me. Yet the question haunted me. How had the smugglers known we were coming? Who had betrayed us? That morning, when I returned home, Amina rushed toward me, her face pale at the sight of my stained shirt. "What happened? Were you hurt?" she asked breathlessly. I reassured her it was Shabir who had been shot, not me, and that he was recovering. She clasped her hands in prayer, whispering her thanks, but as she spoke, I remembered her probing questions, the intensity with which she had sought details. My love for her tried to silence suspicion, but Shabir's words echoed in my mind. "Be careful whom you trust." For the first time, I wondered if the miracles that had blessed my home carried shadows I had refused to see. The failed raid gnawed at me for days. Officer Shabir's words about a leak in the force replayed endlessly in my mind. I told myself it couldn't be anyone close to me, least of all Amina. She was my wife, my confidant, the woman whose prayers I believed had saved my life more than once. Yet unease lingered, sharp and insistent, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. Then came the turning point. Amina was nearing the end of her pregnancy, and expenses weighed heavily on me. Between medical bills and a loan I had taken for a small car, I was drowning in worry. I began to think of the mysterious help we had received before. Each time the money and food had appeared through her. What if I tried to step into her place? Would the help come again? The thought was reckless, but desperation drove me. One evening, while she slept, I draped one of her veils over my head and sat in the courtyard, pretending to be her. The door was left slightly ajar, just as she always arranged it. My heart thundered as I waited, feeling foolish and uneasy. As dusk deepened, two men entered. They didn't hesitate, didn't even glance at me closely. One placed a bag of groceries by my feet, the other dropped a bundle of cash. Then, without lowering their voices, they began to speak. "Tell her," one said, "the information was accurate last time. We were ready for them before they even arrived." The second man laughed darkly. "Their officer survived, but luck won't protect him forever. Next time, make sure she asks for details again. Our plan is nearly complete." My body went cold. They thought I was Amina. They believed she was part of their network. I wanted to leap up to grab them by the collars, but shock pinned me to the ground. When they finally left, I sat frozen, the money and food untouched, the veil still clutched in my trembling hands. The truth was undeniable. The woman I loved, the woman I thought was blessed with miracles, had been feeding information to smugglers. Every prayer, every whispered supplication, every mysterious gift, none of it was divine. It was strategy. It was betrayal. I pressed my hands to my face, my chest burning with anger and grief. I had shared everything with her, told her details of Shabir's missions, trusting she cared about my safety. In reality, she had been passing those details along, sabotaging us at every turn. Tears blurred my vision. My world had been built on a lie, and the woman I thought God had sent as a blessing was, in fact, the weapon my enemies had planted against me. That night, love and trust within me died, replaced by a single resolve. I had to act before it was too late. I sat for a long time in the courtyard after the men left, the bundle of cash lying untouched beside me. My hands shook as I stared at it, hatred and sorrow wrestling in my chest. Every meal she had cooked, every prayer she had whispered, every tear she had shed, I replayed them all in my mind, and each moment twisted into a cruel mockery of love. She had fooled me so thoroughly that I had become her accomplice without even knowing it. I could not let it go on. My loyalty to Officer Shabir and to my country outweighed the broken pieces of my heart. With trembling fingers, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. My voice cracked as I spoke, but I told him everything: the deliveries, the overheard conversation, the truth about Amina. There was silence on the other end, followed by Shabir's steady voice. "Stay where you are, Atif. We're coming." Half an hour later, headlights swept across the walls of my house. Vehicles pulled up and armed officers spilled out. Among them were female constables, their faces grim. I sat on the charpoy like a statue, numb and hollow. Shabir himself approached me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "You've done the right thing," he said quietly. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of betrayal pressed too hard against my chest. The officers moved inside. From the bedroom, I heard Amina's startled voice rise in panic. "Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here?" Her cries grew sharper as the women tried to bring her out. "Atif!" she screamed, her voice trembling with desperation. "Atif, tell them." "I've done nothing wrong." "Why are they taking me?" "I am your wife." I turned my face away. I couldn't bear to look at her. The image of her veiled face, whispering verses, now seemed like a mask hiding venom. Yet hearing her call my name broke something inside me. My throat tightened, tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself to remain silent. When she was finally brought outside, her eyes found me instantly. She struggled against the officers, reaching out, pleading, "Please, Atif, don't let them take me. Say something. You know me. You love me." I clenched my fists so hard that my nails cut into my palms. My heart screamed to run to her, but my mind knew the truth. If I faltered now, I would betray everything Shabir stood for, everything I claimed to love about my homeland. Shabir's voice broke through my torment. "You've shown courage, Atif." "Few men could do what you just did," I whispered back, my voice raw. "She's carrying my child." "Don't hurt her. Whatever happens, promise me you'll protect the baby." Tears blurred my vision. The woman I once adored was gone, dragged away in disgrace. All that remained was the hollow ache of love twisted into betrayal. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The house felt unbearably silent without Amina's presence. I kept hearing echoes of her voice, the way she called my name as the officers dragged her away. Yet I could not forget what I had overheard with my own ears. She had never been the miracle I thought she was. She had been a weapon planted in my life, and I had been blind. The investigation moved swiftly. Evidence piled up against her. Coded messages, intercepted phone calls, and the testimonies of the men I had confronted that night. Her real name was Rashi, not Amina, and she was part of the very smuggling network that Officer Shabir had been fighting for months. Her piety, her miracles, even our marriage, everything had been a carefully laid plan to gain access to Shabir's operations through me. The court sentenced her to death. When Shabir told me, he offered me a choice. If you wish to see her one last time, you may. Closure sometimes comes that way, but I shook my head. I couldn't face her again. To look into her eyes would be to relive the pain, the betrayal, the memories of nights when I believed her to be an angel. I chose to let her fade from my sight, though never from my heart's scars. Soon after, a different kind of moment came, one filled with both grief and joy. In the hospital, the nurse placed a tiny bundle into my arms. My son. My hands trembled as I held him close, his small chest rising and falling, his cries piercing the quiet. Tears slid down my cheeks as I whispered the call to prayer into his ear, my voice breaking. I named him Muhammad Aziz, a name that carried strength and dignity, a name that I hoped would protect him from the shadows of his mother's choices. Holding him, I made a silent vow. He would not grow up in deception or betrayal. He would not be taught falsehoods disguised as faith. Instead, I would raise him with honesty, courage, and love. He would know what it meant to stand for something greater than himself. Shabir visited a few days later, resting a hand on my shoulder like a father. Your heart is heavy, Atif, he said. But remember this, you chose your country over your pain. That sacrifice is what makes men truly strong. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers curled around mine. One day, I whispered, you will grow to be like him. A man of honor, a protector, someone who will never let betrayal find a place in his heart. And in that moment, though my world had been broken, I felt the faint stirrings of redemption.